I paid $4,800 in cash for first last and deposit to a landlord named Pamela. 12 hours after I moved in, a stranger let himself in with his own key and asked who I was. The apartment wasn't hers to rent. She was the previous tenant, kept a copy of the key, and had pulled the exact same scam on two other renters before me. This is a rental scam that stole $65 million from Americans in a single year. The victim, Emily, is 25. She found a listing, paid first, last, and a deposit, and thought she was home. But the person who unlocked her door that morning wasn't a criminal in the shadows. It was the real owner. And what he told her revealed a fraud that had already claimed multiple victims before she ever signed a lease. Emily had been searching for an apartment for 6 weeks. The market in her city was brutal. Every decent listing had 40 applicants within the first hour. She was sleeping on a friend's couch, her belongings in a storage unit, and her move-out deadline from her old place had expired 2 weeks earlier. Desperation does something to your judgment. It makes you ignore the small voice that says something isn't right. The listing appeared on Facebook Marketplace on a Tuesday night. A 2-bedroom and a brick walk-up on Maple Street. $1,200 a month, all utilities included. First, last, and a 1-month security deposit to move in. The photos showed hardwood floors, exposed brick in the kitchen, big windows with natural light. It was underpriced for the neighborhood by at least $500. Emily messaged immediately. The woman who responded called herself Pamela. She was friendly, professional, and urgent. She said she was the owner and had multiple interested renters, but Emily seemed like a great fit. The catch: Pamela couldn't show the unit in person because she was out of state caring for her elderly mother. It's a classic line. The Federal Trade Commission has flagged it in thousands of scam reports, but Emily didn't know that. She just heard a sympathetic voice on the phone and saw an apartment she could actually afford. Pamela sent a video walkthrough. She offered to mail the keys once payment cleared. She even had a lease agreement ready to sign electronically. Emily looked it over. There was no official letterhead, no property management logo. But Pamela explained that she was a private owner, not a big company. That made sense for the price. Emily transferred $4,800 via Zelle. The money left her account at 9:43 p.m. By Friday, a set of keys arrived in a padded envelope. She moved in on a Saturday morning. The apartment matched the video. Everything felt legitimate. She unpacked her kitchen boxes, set up her bed, and started to feel for the first time in months that she had a home. But later that night, small things began to gnaw at her. The mail on the kitchen counter was addressed to a Richard something. The welcome mat on the front porch had a monogram that didn't match Pamela's initials. She told herself it was nothing. Previous owner. Old details. Then at 7:15 the next morning, Emily heard a key slide into the front door lock. Not a knock. A key. Someone was letting themselves in. The man in the doorway was in his late 50s, with a worn canvas jacket and a clipboard in his hand. His keys were still dangling from the deadbolt. He looked at Emily with genuine confusion, then stepped back as if he had walked into the wrong unit. He checked the number on the doorframe. Then he asked slowly, "Who are you and why are you inside my apartment?" Emily's mind scrambled. She managed to say, "I live here. I just moved in yesterday. Who are you?" The man pulled out a driver's license and a property tax bill. His name was Richard Hartley. He was the legal owner of the building and he had owned it for 17 years. He had never heard of anyone named Pamela, and he had certainly never rented this unit to Emily. Emily showed him the signed lease, the Zelle confirmation, and the key Pamela had mailed. Richard examined the lock. That was the first real crack in the story. The deadbolt cylinder was not his. It had been swapped. Sometime in the past few weeks, someone had unscrewed the original lock, installed a brand new cylinder, and kept the only keys. Whoever did it had access to the apartment and enough time to do the work without anyone noticing. Richard did know a Pamela. Pamela Driscoll had been his tenant in this exact unit for 2 years. She moved out 3 months ago after her lease expired. She had been quiet, paid rent on time, and left the place spotless. Richard had changed the locks after she returned her keys, or at least he paid a handyman to do it. Now it was clear that either the change never happened, or Pamela had made a copy long before she moved out. then swapped the lock later. She had planned this departure like a heist. But here's the thing Richard said next, and it changed everything. Emily was not the first person to show up at that door. 5 days earlier, a young man had knocked with a U-Haul double parked on the street. He had a lease signed by a Pamela Owens, and he had wired $3,600 for first and last. Richard had to break the news to him on the doorstep. The man, a grad student named Derek, had no legal right to be there and had to drive his U-Haul back to his parents' house that same night. Now Emily was victim number 2. And within 48 hours, Richard would get a call from a third person, a nurse named Marisol who had paid Pamela a deposit to hold the unit for a June move-in. The pattern was unmistakable. Pamela was running a serial rental fraud operation, using the same apartment she no longer had any right to enter, and she was collecting deposits like a full-time business. The money had vanished into a Zelle account that was linked to a prepaid phone number. The email on the lease bounced. The Facebook Marketplace listing was deleted within hours of each payment. The Federal Trade Commission tracks this exact scheme, and in the 12 months ending last June, half of all reported rental scams started with a fake listing on Facebook. The median loss per victim is around $1,000. Emily had lost 4 times that amount. Derek had lost more. Marisol had paid 2 months up front. Combined, the 3 of them had handed over nearly $10,000 to a ghost. When Emily called her bank, they said Zelle transfers are treated like cash. Once the recipient accepts, the money is unrecoverable. The police took a report but called it a civil dispute at first. A detective told her that unless they could prove criminal intent and locate the suspect, there wasn't much they could do. Pamela had used a fraudulent lease, but she had also given Emily working keys. The lines between theft and breach of contract were blurry, and scammers know how to stay inside those blurred lines. But Emily refused to let it go. She found Derek through a local renters' rights group on Reddit. Then Marisol reached out after seeing Emily's post in a neighborhood Facebook group. The 3 of them compared their leases, their text threads, and their bank records. That's when they found the thread that would unravel everything. Pamela had made one mistake. She had used the same notary seal on all 3 lease agreements, a seal that belonged to a real notary in a neighboring county, a woman who had no idea her stamp was being used on fraudulent documents. It turned the case from a civil matter into something prosecutors could actually pursue: forgery, identity theft, wire fraud. And when the victims started digging into the notary connection, they found that the same forged seal had appeared on lease agreements in 2 other cities, both for apartments where the landlord had been a former tenant with access to keys. Pamela wasn't a desperate person who made one bad choice. She was a professional, and she was still out there, still posting, still collecting deposits from people who had no idea they were walking into a trap. The 3 victims didn't wait for the police to catch up. They set a trap of their own. They created a fake renter profile, responded to one of Pamela's newest listings, and waited for her to name a price. Within 12 hours, Pamela responded. The fake profile was a 26-year-old nurse named Kayla. The listing was a 1-bedroom in a converted Victorian, utilities included, first month free if you signed within 48 hours. The price was $700 below market. Kayla asked to see the unit. Pamela replied with the same excuse she had used on Emily. She was out of town, her mother was ill, but she could send a video and mail the keys. She pushed for a fast decision. She said 3 other people were interested. Emily, Derek, and Marisol watched the messages arrive in real time from a laptop in a coffee shop. They had already contacted the county sheriff's fraud division, and a detective agreed to monitor the exchange. The plan was to arrange a money drop that police could trace. Kayla told Pamela she didn't trust Zelle. She wanted to pay cash. After some hesitation, Pamela agreed. They set a meeting in the parking lot of a shopping mall for 5 o'clock the next evening. Pamela would bring the keys and a signed lease. Kayla would bring an envelope with $4,500. At 4:45, the detective and 2 plainclothes officers were positioned in parked cars around the lot. Emily, Derek, and Marisol waited inside a coffee shop across the street, watching through the front window. At 5:07, a gray Honda Civic pulled into the lot. The woman behind the wheel matched the photo Pamela had used on her Facebook profile. She parked, glanced around, and got out carrying a manila envelope. The detective moved first. Two officers blocked the exits. Within 90 seconds, Pamela Driscoll was in handcuffs, and the manila envelope was on the hood of a patrol car. Inside the envelope were three things: a set of keys to a unit she no longer had legal access to, a lease with the same forged notary stamp, and a handwritten note listing the names of four other people she was currently negotiating with. The detective handed the note to Emily through the window of the coffee shop. She recognized one of the names, a woman who had commented on her Reddit post just the day before, describing a nearly identical situation in a town 60 miles away. That was the moment the scale of the operation became visible. Pamela had been running this scheme concurrently in 3 counties, using vacant units she had previously rented, keys she had never returned, and lock cylinders she had learned to swap from a YouTube tutorial. Investigators eventually linked her to 11 victims across 2 states. Combined losses exceeded $68,000. She had been doing it for nearly 2 years, ever since her marriage ended and she lost her job at a title company. That job, it turned out, was where she had learned how to forge notary stamps and draft convincing lease agreements. The criminal charges included felony fraud, identity theft, forgery, and grand larceny. But here's what surprised everyone, including the prosecutor. The Zelle transfers, the cash deposits, the wire payments, none of that money existed anymore. Pamela had spent it. Not on luxury, not on cars or vacations. She had been paying her own mounting debts, her mother's medical bills, and the rent on a basement apartment where she was living under a fake name. The woman who had scammed 11 people out of their savings had less than $400 in her checking account when she was arrested. The victims, and there were now 11 of them, were unlikely to ever see full restitution. But then something happened that no one expected, not even Emily. The real owner, Richard Hartley, asked to speak with her after the arrest. He had watched the entire investigation unfold from his apartment upstairs. He had seen Emily's texts, her bank statements, her determination to stop Pamela from doing this to anyone else, and he had a proposal that would rewrite the ending of the entire case. The proposal Richard made was simple. He had a unit sitting empty because Pamela's fraud had made him wary of conventional listings. He had seen Emily's credit report, her previous rental history, and the $4,800 she had lost. He also saw that she had refused to walk away when she could have. She didn't just save herself. She pulled 2 other victims out of the same trap and helped stop a serial fraudster. He told her the apartment she was standing in could be hers on a legitimate 12-month lease, at a rent that matched what she had originally thought she was paying, with her first month already covered. He returned her security deposit himself, calling it an investment in a tenant he now trusted without a single background check. The lease was on official letterhead, signed in ink, with the real deadbolt installed while she watched. Emily went from being a scam victim with no home to a legally protected tenant in the same apartment on the same day. The legal system moved slower, but it did move. Pamela Driscoll faced 11 counts of felony fraud, 3 counts of identity theft for the forged notary stamps, and 1 count of grand larceny that stacked the dollar amounts across all victims. Prosecutors offered her a plea deal because the evidence was overwhelming, and because several victims, including Emily, agreed it was more important to secure restitution than to maximize prison time. Pamela pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts. She was sentenced to 5 years with 2 suspended, plus 3 years of supervised probation. The court ordered her to pay full restitution to all 11 victims, a total of $68,412, deducted from any future wages, tax returns, or assets she might acquire. Realistically, that money will take decades to collect. But the legal judgment itself meant the victims could clear the fraudulent debts from their credit reports and prove to future landlords that they were not the ones who broke a lease. Derek, the grad student who had showed up with a U-Haul 5 days before Emily, moved into a legitimate sublet 2 streets away with a rewritten rental history. Marisol, the nurse, found a new unit in the same building, rented directly from Richard, after he rekeyed every single lock in the property and verified the identity of every occupant. The three of them stayed connected through a group chat that initially existed for evidence gathering and later became a support network. They referred to themselves, only half joking, as the Deadbolt Detectives. The case also triggered something bigger than one apartment. The detective who handled the sting reached out to the county prosecutor's office and proposed a task force specifically for rental fraud, which had been buried under larger property crime caseloads for years. The forged notary stamp that cracked the case became an exhibit in training materials for new fraud investigators. Emily's method of creating a fake renter profile to bait the scammer was actually adopted by a local tenants' rights nonprofit as a monitoring tool. Pamela had inadvertently taught her own victims how to stop the exact crime she had perfected. The FBI's Boston division has warned that rental scams spike whenever housing markets tighten and desperation drives down caution. The Federal Trade Commission tracked over 65,000 rental scam reports in 5 years, with $65 million in confirmed losses. But those numbers only capture the people who file reports. Experts estimate the real figure is 2 to 3 times higher because so many victims feel embarrassed or blame themselves. Emily almost didn't report it. She told herself she should have seen the red flags, the too low price, the refusal to meet in person, the Zelle transfer with no buyer protection. But that self-blame is exactly what scammers count on. It's how Pamela got away with it for 2 years. The moment Emily decided to stop blaming herself was the moment the trap reversed. Here's one final detail that nobody saw coming. When investigators seized Pamela's laptop, they found a spreadsheet with rows for each prospective victim, including names, amounts, and a column labeled guilt tolerance. Pamela had rated each mark on a scale of 1 to 10 for how likely they were to push back. Emily had a score of 2. She was supposed to be an easy target, someone who would blame herself, move on, and never file charges. That assessment, printed out and handed to Emily by a prosecutor, now hangs framed in her living room, right next to the legitimate lease she signed with Richard. The number 2, circled in red, with a note underneath written by Emily herself. She was wrong about me. Emily's story could have ended very differently. It could have been a cautionary tale about a woman who lost $4,800 to a stranger and never got it back, another statistic buried in an FTC report. But it didn't end that way because she made one decision that most victims never make. She refused to stay silent. The shame and self-blame that keep rental fraud underreported are exactly what allow people like Pamela to operate for years. When victims speak up, when they compare leases, when they share bank records in a group chat, the scam loses its most powerful weapon, which is isolation. Every single person watching this has probably seen a listing that felt too good to be true. A price well below market, a landlord who can't meet in person, a request for payment through an app with no protection. The red flags are almost always visible, but so is the pressure of a tight housing market and the fear of missing out. The question isn't whether scams exist. It's whether you'll trust the voice in your head that tells you something is off. Emily learned to trust hers, and because she did, she didn't just get her home back. She changed the way her entire county investigates rental fraud. She gave a blueprint to victims who thought they had no power, and she turned a woman who rated her guilt tolerance as a 2 into the reason that scammer is now serving a prison sentence. If this story stuck with you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Sometimes the people who are supposed to be easy targets turn out to be the ones you should have been afraid of all along.